Next speaker is Gaurav Goel from IIT Delhi. So he's going to talk about linear response-driven molecular dynamics for protein structure prediction and protein conformational transitions. Yes, Gaurav.
So, first of all, big thanks to the organizers to make it possible and for inviting me. And I know it's been a long time in making, but finally, I think even virtually we have been able to be together. Okay. All right. So today I'm going to talk about kind of very recent work from the group. So this has been, let's say, last 6 to 9 months kind of development. So some of the things we also don't understand, and hopefully we can use this opportunity to learn together. Okay. So broadly, what I'm going to tell you is that we have combined the linear response theory with what is known as excited normal modes molecular dynamics simulations to push conformational transitions on small timescales. And then we also show that we can use the knowledge of these intermediates which we are identifying on the transition pathway to build the free energy paths using, for example, path metadynamics. Okay, so that's the broad kind of theme. And in terms of two broad applications I'm going to discuss today. One would be protein conformational change on ligand binding, and another would be transient pore formation in a lipid bilayer. So I covered the outline. So that's what I mentioned. So I'll first start my talk with a little bit of method development details, and then talk about these two applications. So before we go to the problem at hand, the method development, although again, pretty much everyone in this room would be already agreeing with me that these are important questions which we are asking. So broadly, I will tell you what were our kind of motivations or interests in developing this method. So number one, I also want to know the intermediate. So if I'm looking at the apo to holo transition pathway, so if I go from the unbound to the bound state on ligand binding, in addition to the end state, I also need to know what are the intermediates. And I'm showing you one example here for the ribose binding protein, where actually it is one of the intermediates which is involved in ribose release. Okay, so these function intermediates are present in several transition pathways, and therefore their knowledge is important. Okay. Second, on top of this, I want to get a complete understanding of equilibrium dynamics. So I need to know the structure space, the intermediates, how they look like, and I also want to calculate the underlying free energy landscape. So minimum free energy paths, how the transitions are happening, what are the barriers we are encountering, so on and so forth. Yeah. And in terms of challenges, I think this has been discussed a lot. This is a large landscape, large time scale problem. Depending on, for example, if there are allosteric effects moving away from the ligand interface, many other residues are involved. In that sense, it becomes a global protein size problem. So large landscape and time scales could be anywhere from milliseconds, even higher, which are not directly accessible from molecular dynamic simulations. Second challenge is I don't know the relevant degrees of freedom. So I want to add some bias. I want to do metadynamics, umbrella sampling, other adaptive sampling techniques, but I need to know a few relevant degrees of freedom that are necessary to drive the change from one state to another. So those are some of the challenges one will encounter. Okay, so now I will introduce the methodology. So it's kind of little bit technical in terms of how we develop this approach. So it is based on the linear response theory, which was first, or at least in terms of being applied to proteins. One of the initial examples was by Aikiguchi and co-workers in 2005. And they developed the theory with the aim of a weak perturbation, but getting a large scale change in structure. Okay. So they wanted a large scale change, and in that limit, if I want a large scale change, I have to assume the perturbation force, which is represented by F here, is a weak force. So in our case, for example, if I'm looking at the binding of a ligand to a protein, this external force is the force by the ligand on the protein. Okay. And what I'm interested in here is getting to this displacement vector, and the second input to this answer is coming from the covariance matrix of protein fluctuations calculated in the unbound state. Now, we show that, in fact, if you're only interested in the direction of initial response, that means if you go to the small displacement limit, then this force F can in fact be a strong perturbation as long as you limit the size of the displacement. Okay. So we kind of extend that analysis and show that if I'm only interested in direction of initial response, I still get the same expression, small change, but in terms of the unit vector, there is no change. So I get the same response direction in the limit of small displacement. That is, if I'm only interested in the direction of initial response. So now we make use of this knowledge. So I have obtained this initial direction. Now the second part which we add is that we are going to find out the normal modes. And essentially we are going to map the response direction on the normal mode space. Okay. So we first do the parameterization of an isotropic network model. And for simplicity, we take all spring constants as equal. So this is kind of a well-established method. It has been used a lot. And typically one uses the fluctuations of protein atoms to get the parameters of ANM. So on the top left picture, that's what I'm showing, that we are using the fluctuations of protein atoms, and the anisotropic network model we are developing is able to reproduce those fluctuations. So that is very nice. Second addition which we made in the parameterization stage is that I first identify. So on the right, I'm showing you this one picture where I'm showing you what are the dominant modes along the response direction. So this is showing the weights. So I'm showing you the weights of the dominant modes along the response direction. So our second aim in the parameterization was that I want to reduce the number of these dominant modes. So we use a Shannon entropy measure, which would be equal to 1. If all the modes are contributing equally, it will be equal to 0. If only one mode is contributing to the direction, that means a single mode is completely overlapping with the response direction, then you get a Shannon entropy measure of 0. So in that sense, I want as small a value of the Shannon entropy as possible while preserving the reproduction of protein fluctuations. Okay, so we use these two constraints, and the benefit of this is that I get a small number of relevant modes rather than a very large number of relevant modes. So on the right, I'm showing you for one particular case of adenylate kinase, and depending on the ligand, in this case, the ligand is adenosine diphosphate. So when this ligand is binding to the protein of interest, adenylate kinase, we are identifying the 3 dominant modes, which I'm showing by blue arrows. And these are the modes which we identified in the initial structure. And it is, so broadly, this protein has 2 domains, the lid domain and the NMP domain. And the initial motion in other works also has been predicted to be in the lid domain. And that's what we are also predicting here, that the initial motion is in the lid domain. Okay, so I will come to this point again, that why I'm calling this initial motion and what else we do to get the final structure. Okay, but for now, all of these calculations I'm showing you in the initial unbound state, and therefore all these directions which I am identifying are only relevant for the initial motion of the protein, not the overall motion of the protein during conformational change. Okay, now the last task is I want to enhance the sampling along the response direction, and that is where this molecular dynamics with excited normal modes developed by Costa and co-workers comes in. So they have shown that you can select normal modes, and along whatever normal mode you want to bias the sampling, you can add an extra velocity term. Okay, so here that is what is this showing. I add an extra velocity term along the choice of my normal modes, and in this, the 2 parameters which will govern the direction and extent of conformational change are listed here. So one of them is alpha I, which we use to control the direction of conformational change. And as mentioned here, the direction should be along the response direction predicted by linear response theory. So alpha i's we will choose in such a fashion that the direction of conformational change in this excited normal mode simulations overlaps with the predicted direction by linear response theory. And the second very important factor is the extent of conformational change. So several other studies have already shown that the linear response theory is not accurate for large displacement. And even we are showing in our derivation that only in the case of small displacements, I can get the linear response theory expression, even in the case of strong perturbation. So we want to limit our delta t so that I stay in that so-called small displacement regime that is within the region of validity of the linear response theory. So those are the two, let's say, governing principles we are going to use to find out alpha I and delta t. So alpha I, as I mentioned, I want to ensure that the addition of kinetic energy is happening along the direction predicted by linear response theory. So for that, we use this simple expression which shows the conversion of kinetic energy added to a mode into its displacement. So we use this expression in very simple terms. It's clear that if I add the same energy, the displacement would be different depending on the stiffness of the mode. And the stiffness is being captured by the frequency for that particular mode, omega I. Okay. So if the stiffness is smaller, you will get larger displacement. If stiffness is larger, you will get smaller displacement. So intuitively, it makes sense. And mathematically, this is the equation we use for conversion of kinetic energy to potential energy to find out alpha is. So with this choice of alpha I, omega I times OI. OI was my overlap factor. Okay. So OI gives me the overlap of response direction with any given normal mode. So it is a projection of response direction on any given normal mode. And omega I is the frequency for that normal mode. And what we are showing is that if I choose my alpha I not equal to OI, that is the overlap, but rather the product of overlap with the frequency, the change in the displacement is overlapping very nicely with the direction of linear response. So this we are showing in our paper, which is under review. I'm not showing those graphs, but it was clearly shown that yes, with this choice, you are getting very nice overlap with the direction of with the response direction, which is the direction predicted by linear response theory. Now the second parameter. So I want to ensure this delta t gives me small displacements. So I will just read you or walk you through this plot here. So what I'm showing you is the structural change along the response direction, which we are measuring in terms of this parameter dp. So dp is essentially the actual change and its projection along the response direction. So whatever is the actual change in the structure, we take the projection along the response direction, and that gives me the dp vector. So this dp I am estimating at various different values of delta t. So larger the value of delta t, larger the energy, kinetic energy I'm adding to my response direction, larger will be the structural change. However, it might or might not lead me to the correct end state. So the black plot here is showing you that as you increase delta t, dp in general will increase. However, I am also showing you in blue the RMSD of any particular structure with respect to the end structure. So in this case, I'm interested in finding the hollow state structure. So this blue line is showing you the RMSD of any structure with respect to the hollow state structure. Okay. So what we observed was that up to a certain delta t, these two variables, that is dp and RMSD, we also looked at some other variables, for example, global distance test metric. So all these structural change metrics had a very nice correlations with dp up to a certain value of delta t, and beyond that point the correlation decreased, which is again coming back to the failure of linear response theory at large displacement. So all we are doing here essentially is an automated selection of delta t up to the region of validity of linear response theory. So in earlier applications of linear response theory, it was selected to a finite value 2 angstrom, 3 angstrom, whatever worked. Here we are showing that you can actually obtain this on the fly by using this DP metric, and the region I have highlighted marks the plateau region, the first plateau region in DP as a function of delta T. Okay. So this highlighted region, so it's clear that if delta T is very small, the structure will go back to the initial state. So DP will be 0. So I don't want that. So whenever DP changes by a finite amount, the first finite change in DP we choose as our delta T. Okay. So in this sense, we are limiting the structural change in our any one iteration of excited normal mode simulation by design. We are making the structural change small, which clearly means that if I want to obtain a large scale structural change, I need multiple iterations. So those are the two essentially parts of this process. In each step, I make a choice of alpha I and delta T to ensure I stay within the region of validity of linear response theory, and I make a structural change which has a high overlap with the response direction. And secondly, now I will affect multiple iterations, and one main benefit of this multi-step process is that in addition to the end state structure, you also get information on intermediates. So the target was get the information on intermediates. This multi-step protocol automatically allows me some intermediates. Are those intermediates good or bad? We'll discuss later. Finally, I need to stop somewhere. So we use the protein ligand binding energy estimate as a marker of our stop point. So this is a combination of two contributions. One is the MMBBSA binding energy. So this is an implicit solvent method to calculate binding energies. And second is that we also add the protein strain energy. So as the protein structure changes with respect to the unbound state, we add a measure of strain energy, which gives me the total protein ligand binding energy in this case. Okay. And what we see here is, in this particular case, for adenylate kinase, adenosine diphosphate, after 6 steps, I get a minima in this metric delta delta G, and therefore we stopped at this point and we said this is my prediction for the holo state. So this we tested for 3 systems which presented differences in the extent of structural change, the amount of non-linearity, which is mainly coming from presence of multiple modes or presence of structural change along multiple modes, and finally also presence of allosteric effects. For example, the ribose binding protein shows prominent allosteric effects during its structural transition. So in each case, we are seeing that we are starting at a high RMSD with respect to the holo state structure, 7.2 angstrom for adenylate kinase, 6.4 for ribose binding protein, so on and so forth. For the last one, it was small. And in each case, we are able to come very close to the holo state structure. So almost within 2 angstrom of the holo state structure. We also found out the modes along which the motion is happening, comparing the crystallographic structures and our predicted structures. In both cases, we see a very nice overlap in respect to displacement along each individual mode also. So now the next part, which I mentioned, that in addition to the end state, I'm also interested in finding out the information on intermediates. So this I will cover in less detail. The student who worked on this part, Rajat Punya, he is also presenting a poster. So he will cover these aspects in more details in his poster. So I'm just going to cover the key points here. So one, we compare the path we are finding in terms of just structure. Right now, I don't have an estimate of free energy, but I'm saying that whatever set of intermediates I have identified, my protocol is leading me to a minimum free energy path. We will test that later on. But right now, the assumption is that whatever set of intermediates we have identified, they actually lie on the minimum free energy path. And this we compare against, for the adenylate kinase problem, we compare against bias exchange metadynamics. This was done in the set of 2 coordinates, this bias exchange simulations. This we have taken from Lee et al. Paper, Biophysical Journal. So that is shown in red. And the prediction from our multi-step protocol is shown in black. So what we are seeing here is that overall matches maybe the bias exchange simulation missed an important coordinate. Therefore, the transition is not so smooth. When we add one more collective variable, I'm not showing data here, the transition looks much smoother in our multi-step MDENM protocol. So if I add the third mode also in the space of 3 normal modes, the transition looks much smoother than what is being shown here. This is a 2D projection of that 3-dimensional transition. And roughly it matches what was predicted. Okay, I will not go in much details. Now on the right hand side, I am showing you the comparison of intermediates we had identified for the ribose binding protein. So we compare our intermediates against crystallographic structures in terms of RMSD. And I'm also showing on the right the path tracked by these crystallographic structures, as well as the path tracked by umbrella sampling simulations taken from Ravindranathan and co-workers. Okay, so again, what we are seeing is the set of intermediates we are predicting are matching very well with other more detailed, more expensive simulation techniques, as well as whatever crystallographic structure data was available. Okay, now finally, what we did was we took these structures as inputs to a path metadynamics simulation to find out whether the path which we are predicting is indeed correct or not. That is, the set of structures we have predicted, do they lie close to z equal to 0 or not? Okay, so here I'm only showing you the answers for the hollow state. We required around 500 nanoseconds of simulations to get convergence. For both apo and hollow state, the answer was almost similar. So we use the same set of structures for the apo state also, but of course we did not include the ligand in that simulation. And this hollow state simulation, we included the ligand. So what we observed in fact was that if I do not include the ligand, then the state near s equal to 0, which is the unbound state, was the most stable state. And when I include the ligand, you can see on the bottom left that the state corresponding to s equal to 1, which is the bound state crystallographic structure, is the most stable state. And the path which we are predicting is lying very close to z equal to 0. Also, what we can see from this picture that we are predicting 2 possible paths. And in fact, the bias exchange metadynamic simulations, the data I'm showing on the right, again from the group of, or from this earlier publication, that was also predicting 2 possible paths. And right now we are going to further, we are evaluating this second graph ourselves in the space of these 2 angles, the lid core angle and the NMP core angle, to find out whether the path predicted in that is the same as the path predicted by us using the path metadynamic simulations, where the structures were taken from the multi-step MDENM simulation. So that is kind of the first story for this talk today. The second application, as I mentioned, we are also interested in lipid bilayer conformational dynamics. And right now we have investigated passive pore formation, but going forward, we are also going to work on active pore formation, which is basically allowing us to determine the permeation of ligands, peptides, molecules across a lipid bilayer. So some of that we saw actually in yesterday's talk by Ron Elber, where they were looking at permeation of peptides, a specific peptide they had chosen, across a lipid bilayer. So in general, the collective motions in lipid bilayers are very diverse. Membrane fusion, pore formation, interaction with membrane proteins, cell penetrating peptides, so on and so forth. All of those will lead to a coupling of macromolecular motion with the lipid bilayer motion. Okay, so these are some of the pictures which are showing the various kind of motions. On the bottom left, you are seeing peptides transporting across a lipid bilayer, and on the bottom right, I'm showing you pictures of spontaneous pore formation observed in a lipid bilayer. This was done using, again, free energy calculations along a pre-decided set of reaction coordinates. But they show that even in absence of any ligand, any peptide, you can get pore formation in a lipid bilayer. So now again, what we do is we first try to develop an elastic network model for the lipid bilayer now. So protocol is almost the same. Only thing which we add or which we make different from the earlier work which I showed for the protein ligand system is that now I consider the environment also as part of my overall model development. So that means in addition to system spring constant, I will have two more spring constants, the environment and the system environment. And in this case, it was essential to do that because the overall elasticity of the lipid bilayer is much smaller than the protein molecule. So therefore, the interaction with the environment was considered to be very important here. And we actually find out that if I don't consider that interaction, I am not able to reproduce the fluctuations of the lipid bilayer. So if I ignore the interactions with the environment, I will not be able to reproduce accurately the fluctuations of the lipid bilayer. So the parameters we have is the cutoff distance RC for the normal mode development, the spring constants, the 3 spring constants. So total 4 parameters I have, 4 parameterization. So we used a 500 nanosecond molecular dynamics simulation of a 256 molecule lipid bilayer. Roughly the size of the bilayer in the XY dimension was 8.8 into 8.8 nanometers for the calculation of properties, which in this case is mainly position fluctuations, which we use as input to train our model. So again, what I'm showing on the left is that the prediction of fluctuations by our model in blue. I'm showing you the answer from 2 possible values of the cutoff RC, 10 and 14 angstrom. They match overall well with the predictions or the values obtained from molecular dynamics simulations. Okay, so this was again average over all 256 lipid molecules. Okay, then the second variable in the equation, as I mentioned, is gamma SE also. So you can clearly see in this case, sorry, the variable is not very visible on the x-axis. So it is a ratio of gamma SE to gamma SS. So the spring constant for system environment interaction divided by the spring constant for the system interaction. So I can clearly see that if I take this number to be small, that if I take it to be 0, I get small values of position correlation. Okay, so here I'm comparing the Pearson correlation for position fluctuations between the model and the MD simulation. So if I don't include environment, I get a very small value of rho. But if I include the environment, and we are seeing that the maxima is coming approximately around gamma SC by gamma SS equal to 1. So if I include the environment, I get a very high correlation between the MD fluctuations and the prediction from the model. Okay, so therefore I include the environment in our answer. For RC, which is the cutoff distance which we are taking for bead interactions, we see that it is a very broad range. We take a value of 10 angstrom, but 10, 12, 14 work almost similarly. Okay, so on the left, I'm showing you the last piece of the puzzle, the model, where what is the effect of environment interactions. So I can clearly see here that because my solvent is essentially a Newtonian liquid, I will need to take a very small value of gamma EE. I am seeing it is approximately 10 to minus 3, 10 to minus 4, where you start to see a plateau. Okay, so I need to take a very small value of this variable to be able to reproduce the position fluctuations of the lipid. So main parameter to add was gamma ES, the environment interaction with the system. Okay, finally, to get the absolute value of the spring constant, we use the height fluctuation data on the lipid bilayer. Again, this height fluctuation data was calculated from the same MD simulation. And what we are seeing here is that for all wave vectors, a single value of this gamma SS, in this case, it came out to be 1 kilojoules per mole per nanometer square, gave an excellent match with the MD simulation data. So therefore, this kind of summarizes the set of parameters we obtained for our model. How many minutes I have?
Yeah, so you are almost like you have 1 more minute actually. For
one more minute. Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. So I will skip over this part. So this is just kind of validation.
But if you can take some 2-3 minutes more, because I'm 35 minutes will take 5 more minutes to finish. But if you want discussions, then you have to cut short.
Yes. No, I will wrap up. Thank you. I will take one or two more minutes. Okay. So I'm kind of skipping this validation part of the model. So broadly, we did the same things. We looked at the kind of motions we are getting from our model and the kind of motions we are getting from either experimental data or from molecular dynamic simulations. The one addition with respect to the protein problem was that I also need to account for friction along the modes. So we also accounted for friction coefficient along the modes and solved the Langevin equations, which include both the elastic network model and the friction effects in the space of normal modes. And some of the properties like bilayer bending modulus, lipid tilt modulus, relaxation of the undulation. So this relaxation of undulations is where I need to account for friction effects. Otherwise, I will not predict them correctly. So all of these, broadly, we were able to match very well with the available data, either from experiments or from molecular dynamic simulations. Okay. And this one application, I'm just going to mention that it is possible. So using the same linear response driven molecular dynamic simulations, the main change was here, I don't have a perturbative force. So to find out the response direction, rather than using a perturbative force, we define this order parameter, which tells me the shape of the bilayer. And then I use this argument that I choose a direction where the order parameter gradient along the modes is largest. So using that direction as my constraint, I find the set of modes which is relevant. The bottom right picture is showing you the velocity field in the initial lipid bilayer, which is leading to pore formation. And again, we do a multi-step simulation. So this is the top view of the lipid bilayer. Bottom molecules are not shown. So I'm able to see the pore formation, transient pore formation. This is the side view, which is showing you that the water molecules are able to penetrate in the lipid bilayer. And again, now the next task for us is to use these as inputs to a path metadynamics or adaptive sampling technique to find out the free energy profile for this transient pore formation. That's all. So all of this computational work was done by Rajat Punya, a PhD student in the group. He's also presenting a poster mainly on the protein structural change on ligand binding work. And for funding, we thank the SCRB board of Department of Science and Technology and IIT Delhi HPC Center. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Gaurav. So very interesting talk. So actually, there's a question by Shravani Tarottar. She's asking that, Gaurav, how does the linear response driven MD relate to path reweighting?
So I don't have an answer to that question.
Hello?
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that question. So I'm not aware fully about the path reweighting technique.
Okay. So Gaurav, so I have a couple of questions. So basically, in your elastic network model, how is it different from, let's say, standard like large elastic band approaches where we create a lot of replicas and then use a force constant between them? Is it similar?
So here I am. So if I understand you correctly, you are creating the bands between protein replicas.
Right.
But here this anisotropic network model is essentially a simple, let's say, approximation to the Hamiltonian of the protein. So this is a coarse grain. You can think of this as a coarse grain interaction potential.
Okay. And
for a single protein.
Okay. And when you are talking about lipid bilayer, you said that you had to also couple in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So, but how large the environment size would be in order to get the right fluctuation? So how many? What will be the length scale around it?
Yes, correct. So we use a single parameter RC for both the lipid bilayer as well as the lipid bilayer and environment interactions, which in our case we chose to be 10 angstroms. So 1 nanometer. So that was the let's say length scale of interaction of the lipid bilayer with the environment, which was sufficient to reproduce the fluctuations of the lipid bilayer.
Okay. And in the beginning part, like I saw that when you were trying to compare with metadynamics and I think bias section metadynamics simulations and your system, you were saying that they were missing some of the collective variables for the other path. Can you just a little bit elaborate on that?
Yes, I mean, of course, we have not fully calculated the free energy profile, so it will be something which I'm not sure of. But what we are seeing in the in our space, I will go back to that slide. So there are, if you look at, for example, I1 to E1 transition, okay, and then E1 to E2.
Right.
So that entire thing seems highly non-linear.
Okay.
So this might be a real effect, or as I mentioned, that if I go to the three-dimensional profile, then this looks much smoother. So here, what you are seeing in the black curve, which is predicted by us, there are several bounce backs. The collective variable is increasing, then decreasing again.
These I1, E2, they are all stable states.
They are all metastable states. And this I'm showing you on the right. For example, we compared the intermediates which from our algorithm for ribose binding protein, and they showed very good correlation with the variety of crystallographic structures for this protein. Okay. So each of the intermediates corresponding to one particular crystallographic structure, and therefore we are confident that these individual structures are metastable.
Okay, got it. Okay, so I think I don't see any more questions, Gaurav. So thank you again for a very interesting talk.